So in reading that gospel, does it kind of leave you wondering just what in the world is going on here? I mean, it seems like Jesus is condoning deceitfulness and selfishness. Look how shrewd that guy was. His master shows up, and instead of being angry, he's like, hey, wow, clever. Smooth move. Wow. Shrewd, baby, shrewd. We think, well, is that what Jesus is saying? Put that on the shelf for a minute. We'll come back to it. In the meantime, I would like to ask this question. It's kind of rhetorical, and you don't have to answer it out loud. And, you know, it's like in Sunday school when you're teaching first grade. I don't know if you've ever done that. The answer is always Jesus. So this answer will be obvious too, but it's worth pondering. So, should we live lives in which we try to get God to fit into our agenda and our will and our way? Or should we live lives in which we try to fit into God's agenda, God's will, and God's ways? So, you know, a lot of pastors and teachers would take this passage and make it into a thing about money and take it as a platform to try and buff up the coffers at church and, you know, look at what Jesus is saying here. That's really not the issue. The thing that Jesus is getting at, he alludes to in the end. You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. Do you remember when Israel kind of began to follow the world? God wanted the judges, his prophets, to rule the nation, but the nation of Israel, the Hebrew people, decided, you know what, we want to be like everybody else, and everybody else has a king. We need a king. Get us a king. And so along comes Saul, who was head and shoulders above everybody else, and handsome and clever and good-looking, and disaster, because he tried to make God fit into his will and his ways. And then God says, no, I have a king. You know, that's the one you people chose. I'm going to choose, I'll show you who to have as a king. And so Samuel goes out, and he meets Jesse, and God said one of your sons is supposed to be king. And so Jesse brings the biggest and the oldest, and no, says Samuel, not that one. And it goes on and on. No, not that one. No, not that one. And Jesse said, well, that's all I got. And Samuel says, really? You don't have? Well, there's that kid out there in the field taking care of the sheep. It was David. And then the profound line, no, Jesse, you don't get it. God does not look as humans do. God looks where? On the heart. What Jesus is commending in this teaching is that we should be shrewd to protect and keep our heart in focus, in step and rhythm with God's will and God's ways. Sometimes, maybe, I don't know about you, but when I look at our society and what it's become, and I look around at church, seems to me that in many ways, and I'm guilty of it too, that church and God are great when they're convenient and they fit into my schedule. I want God to bless me. I want Him to heal my owies and fill my tummy and take care of my retirement and make sure my car doesn't break down. And, that's convenient. I like God for all those things. But actually give up my will, my ways to fit into God's will and God's ways? And don't think, the old, every time you point a finger, there's three pointing back at you. As I for this message, I don't know why this thing keeps cutting in and out all the time. As I was preparing for this message, I was very acutely aware that God was speaking to me, that the message was for me as much as anybody. And that's one of the things about being a pastor that often people, I think, miss, is that if I'm really surrendered to the Holy Spirit, then what's coming into awareness is a gift from God, and that gift is as much for the messenger as it is for the people who hear the message. So let me just ask that question again, asking it to myself. Is it better to ask God to fit into my schedule, my will, or for me to fit into God's schedule, God's will, and God's ways? And of course, Jesus, we all know the answer to that, don't we? But the question is, what will it take for us to actually take steps of growth to live there more in our society when everything is so convenient? Are we really shrewd about caring for the integrity of our own souls, which is where God looks? So in your bulletin, there's a couple commentaries on some of the key verses from a scholar named William Barclay. William Barclay lived in the 1907 to 1978, and he was a professor of divinity and biblical criticism at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. He was a Scotsman, but he was greatly beloved by people from all different denominations, and I was first introduced to him actually by Father James Martin, who's a Jesuit writer, author, who quotes Barclay extensively. And so this is William Barclay's commentary on these two key passages. Before we go there, let me just break down the teaching in a way that I think will be helpful for us to hear and make sense of what the Spirit is trying to say. So many times when Jesus is talking about, he's teaching a parable, and he's talking about the master. The master had a vineyard, and the master went away, and he trusted the vineyard to his servants. And while he was gone, they made all this money, so he sent his servant back to collect some of the profits. And what do? They beat him up and sent him away. So he sent another one, and they beat him up and sent him away. And so he sent another. He finally said, I'm going to send my son. He sends his son, and what do? They kill him. And in the story, we get it. The master of the vineyard is God. and God sent his prophets, and we kept killing them, or at least chasing them out of town. And so we get it. It's clear. In this parable, so it's just natural at first glance when we look at this that we associate the master with God. And we think, well, what is the master condoning this guy for dishonesty, selfishness, and deceit? How could God condone dishonesty, selfishness, and deceit? But the person in this parable is not, the master is not God. The whole parable is the story of a bunch of shysters out shystering each other, including the master, who his own foreman is such a good shyster, he impresses the master and says, wow, that guy's got some game. He's got it going on. So first of all, we need to see the master is not a metaphor for God. It's a person who's full of worldly wisdom and selfishness and thinks nothing of using deceitfulness to get ahead, who then praises his foreman, his manager, for carrying on so diligently and shrewdly in the ways of the world, and then the servants. So with that in context, if you take page 8 of your bulletin, sermon title, Shrewdness. Usually when we think of shrewdness, do we not usually think of that with a negative connotation? And here Jesus is praising shrewdness. Interesting, right? Under quotes, quoting Jesus, I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. Be shrewd as serpents, says Jesus, and gentle as doves. So in Luke 16 and verse 8, Jesus tells a story revealing that the children of this world are wiser in their generation than the children of light. That means that if only the Christian was as eager and resourceful in their attempt to attain goodness as the persons of this world are in their attempt to attain money, comfort, and power, they would be better people. Have you ever heard a story of somebody who's just literally killing themselves to get ahead? Yeah, I know my kids hate me, but too bad, man. I'm doing the best I can. If only people would give as much attention to the things which concern their souls. We hear a lot of talk in our society today about people who are really concerned about their bodies, their health, their appearance, their insurance. They think these things make them safe. Go visit Virgil, whose days are ticking away, and he knows it. Secluded in his bed, can't get out of bed anymore. And he knows the grand facade has come to an end. That his peace and his joy and his contentment don't rest in his body or his possessions. If only people would give as much attention to the things which concern their souls as they do to the things which concern their business, possessions, and reputations, they would be better people. It is quite true that over and over again a person will expend 20 times the amount of time and money and effort on their pleasures, hobbies, the next one's for you, Mike, golf, garden sport, and relaxation as they do their church. Forsake not the gathering of yourselves together, the writer to the Hebrews says. And so we can just start right there. Is church something that I fit into my schedule when it's convenient? Or is church something that God calls me to be a part of, to be in rhythm with? Our Christianity will only begin to become real and effective when we spend as much time and effort on it as we do our worldly activities. And to do that in this world, because of the pressures of this world, it's going to require shrewdness. A shrewdness that protects the soul. I'm so guilty of this. I am such a people pleaser. I don't want to hurt anybody. I am such an empath. I care so deeply about people. Julie could tell you this, that I'm jumping here and there and running and the next thing. Instead of being shrewd enough to protect my own soul and keep that space sacred for God. I feel like God is saying to me, it's time to stop being Mr. Nicey Pants. I gave you that soul, and it's my temple. It is sacred. If only we would take as much care of our soul. In the second piece of commentary, and we'll be wrapping up with this, in verses 10 to 11, the lesson is that a person's way of fulfilling a small task is the best proof of their fitness or unfitness to be trusted with the bigger task. In other words, what do you do when you're alone and nobody's looking? It's easy to rationalize. It's easy to compromise and to not be shrewd about keeping your soul sacred. That is clearly true of earthly things. No person will be advanced to a higher position until they have given proof or won the trust through honesty and ability in a smaller position. But Jesus extends the principle to eternity. He says, upon earth, you are in charge of things which are not really yours. That's a bit of a wake-up, isn't it? You cannot take them with you when you die. They are only lent to you. You are a steward over them. They cannot, in the nature of things, be permanently yours. On the other hand, in heaven, you will get what is really and eternally and essentially yours. And what you will get in heaven depends on how you use the things on earth. What you will be given as your very own will depend on how you use the things of which you are only a steward on earth. Remember I told you the story of Robert Letourneau? Do you remember? I don't know if that name rings a bell. He was a Texan who in the 70s invented these huge machines. They could grab an entire load of logs at once off a logging truck, and these huge, gigantic, I think 18-wheel earth movers, and he made millions and millions of dollars. But you know what he saw? He saw his ability for business and expertise as an opportunity that he was trusted with to serve God and not compromise his soul. And so instead of giving 10%, you know what he did? He gave 90 and kept 10 for himself. And he still was a millionaire. But do you see the integrity of his heart, where he was focused? And so it's not about how much, because what did Jesus say when the little old widow took her tiny little 2 cents and put them in the offering box? Jesus turned to his disciples and he said, Did you see her? She gave more than anybody else. Because they give out of their abundance what they can spare. She gave all she had from her heart. It's not just about money. It's about your time. It's about your concern for others. It's about how you serve others. So may we, each of us, open our hearts to this kind of strange message from Jesus where he's condoning a shrewdness that actually makes the difference in eternity. The shrewdness of the care of your soul. And nobody can give that gift to you but you. I can stand up here and preach till I'm blue in the face about how important it is to just shut everything off for 10 minutes, put your devotionals away, turn off your television, shut down everything, and just vulnerably sit down for 10 minutes and say, Lord, the day is yours, and here is my soul. Say whatever you want, lead me wherever you want. I am yours. I'm going to fit into your will, your plans, your rhythm. I'm not going to ask you to fit into mine. I can preach that and preach that and preach that, but unless I go home and practice that tomorrow morning, unless you go home and practice that, the soul won't be healthy. Oh, yes, you'll get to go to heaven when you die. If that's good enough for you, then okay. You can just admit that to yourself. I'm just happy I come to church when it works out, talk to my friends once in a while, and, I love the potlucks, and I know where I'm going when I die. I'm good. Jesus says, okay. But guess what? That's exactly what you're going to take with you into the next realm for eternity. It's not like when you die, you just zap up on a cloud of your own, and you can see the other angels on their clouds playing harps, and, oh, there's some golden, sparkly streets. Isn't this delightful? You take yourself there when you go. And what you do on this earth will make a difference to the quality of your experience on the other side. So Jesus is saying, you know what? My children, he's not angry. He's saying this out of love. You, my children, whom I love so much, take seriously the care of your soul. Be shrewd and protected. And so I wrote just a couple little practical things at the bottom in the practice. Steps to becoming divinely shrewd. Clarify who you really are. You know what? It's so helpful. It seems so simple. I am a child of God. I was breathed out of God by love. I'm held by God for love, and I'm going to go home one day to love. Who am I really? I'm a divine child of the Almighty. Number 2, what really truly does matter to you? What really gives you satisfaction in life? Making sure you don't miss the next episode? What are God's priorities for you? Not what are my priorities for God. What are God's priorities for you? Number 4, who does God say you are? You know, Jesus, growing as a human being, before he could start his ministry, something had to happen. Do you remember what happened? He went to John to be baptized, and as he went down into the water and came up, what happened? A voice came out of heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And what happened right after that? He goes into the desert, and what does the devil try to do? He tries to tempt him. If you really are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. What was he attacking? The identity that his Father just gave him. You are my beloved Son. Who are you, really? And 5thly, establish boundaries that enable you to move more authentically and shrewdly. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. You know me. You know how impossible that seems. God, give me your grace to actually take one little step after one little step so that I can be more divinely shrewd about protecting the sanctuary of my own soul so that you can shine there and the world will know that you're still here and that you love them and that there's hope. So the sermon title was Shrewdness. Good or bad? What's the answer? It can be both. Depends what you're shrewd about. One shrewdness Jesus condones. The other, he condemns. And so, in closing, the quote of Jim Elliot, who gave his life to the Auca Indians. He is no fool who gives up that which he cannot keep to gain that which he can never lose. That's divine shrewdness. He is no fool who gives up that which he could never keep to gain that which he could never lose.